in exactly 4 seconds, the man who had spent 31 years making people feel worthless was going to discover what it felt like to have the floor pulled out from under him. Literally. The Hargrove Regional Medical Center Emergency Department on a Thursday night in February smelled the way all ERs smell after midnight, antiseptic cut with something older and more organic, fear sweat and floor cleaner, and the faint metallic note of blood that no amount of mopping ever completely erases. The fluorescent panels overhead threw a flat, merciless light on everything. The scuffed linoleum, the plastic chairs, bolted to the walls, the face of every person who had been waiting too long to be seen. It was the kind of light that stripped away dignity, along with shadow. For most people in that waiting room, the environment was exactly what it was designed to be, a place that reminded you of your smallness. You sat, you waited, you did not ask questions. You were grateful when they finally called your name. Elijah Thorn did not sit and wait like most people. He stood near the main triage desk with the particular stillness of someone who has learned, through long and costly experience. That stillness is not the same as compliance. He was 38 years old, lean and unhurried in dark work pants and a clean grey hoodie, the kind of man whose face read younger than his history actually was. He had driven 45 minutes in a February sleet storm to get here because his mother, Vera Thorn, 71 years old, with a documented history of hypertension and 2 prior cardiac events, had called him at 9:47 p.m., saying her chest felt tight and wrong and different from the other times. He had loaded her into his car and driven without stopping and walked her through those sliding glass doors at 10:31 p.m. and watched a triage nurse take her back behind the double doors at 10:59 p.m. It was now 1:14 a.m. Nobody had come to update him. Nobody had told him anything. He had asked at the desk 3 times, politely, with his voice level and his hands visible, and his tone carefully shaped into the kind of calm that black men learn to perform in institutional spaces when they need something from the people who control access to it. Each time, the young clerk behind the plexiglass had told him someone would be right out. Nobody came out. What nobody in that waiting room knew, what Elijah had not announced or advertised or worn on any visible surface of his body, was that for the previous 11 years, before a herniated disc at L4-L5 had ended his operational career 18 months ago, he had served as a pararescueman with the 83rd Expeditionary Rescue Squadron, United States Air Force. PJs, the community called themselves, the most highly trained combat, search and rescue operators on the planet, men and women who jumped out of aircraft in the dark to reach downed pilots in denied territory, who performed emergency surgical intervention in the field under fire, who were cross-trained in free-fall parachuting, combat diving, mountain warfare, and emergency medicine at a level that made most civilian paramedics look like they were still in orientation. Elijah had personally performed field surgical procedures in conditions that would have made the average ER physician weep. He had kept men breathing who had no business still being alive. He knew exactly what the monitors behind those double doors were measuring, exactly what a troponin elevation meant in a 71-year-old hypertensive woman, and exactly how much time could quietly and permanently run out while a family member sat in a plastic chair, being told to wait. He was not panicking. He was not causing a scene. He was doing the precise opposite of both those things, but his mother was behind those doors. And something about the 1:14 a.m. quality of the silence back there had shifted in a way that his operational nervous system had learned to read like weather. He stood up and walked to the desk for the 4th time. The man who intercepted him before he got there was named Walter Grout. Grout was the overnight security supervisor for Hargrove Regional, a man who wore the word supervisor on a chest badge the way some people wear religious medals, as a talisman, an identity, a justification. He was 53 years old, thick through the torso, and moved with the particular purposefulness of someone who has spent decades in low authority positions, exercising whatever portion of authority was available to him with maximum force. He had worked hospital security for 22 years. He had never, in those 22 years, received a commendation. He had received 11 formal complaints, all of which had been investigated and closed. The hospital's HR department maintained a file on Grout that was, at this point, 3 inches thick and largely inert, because Grout was the kind of institutional fixture that institutions absorb rather than correct, useful enough to keep, difficult enough to dismiss. and completely hidden from the public-facing image the hospital projected on its website. Grout had been watching Elijah since approximately 11:20 p.m. He had watched him stand up. He had watched him sit back down. He had watched him approach the desk the first time, the second time, the third time, and with each approach, something in Grout had tightened, not from concern, not from any accurate assessment of threat, but from the older and uglier thing that had always lived in the space just behind his professional judgment. To Grout, the picture was simple and self-consuming. Young black man in a hoodie, repeatedly approaching the desk, not leaving when told to wait, taking up more space than Grout had decided he was entitled to take up in Grout's ER at Grout's 1 a.m. "Sir." Grout stepped directly into Elijah's path, close enough to constitute a statement rather than a greeting. His hand was already resting on the radio clipped to his belt, fingers curled around it like a weapon. "You've been told multiple times that someone will be with you." Elijah stopped. He looked at Grout with the same expression he had used in the field when an inexperienced officer made a call that was going to get people killed. Not anger, not disrespect, just the flat, clear-eyed assessment of a man calculating exactly how much a situation had already gone sideways. "My mother came in with chest pain 3 hours ago," he said. "She's 71 and she's had 2 prior cardiac events. I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking for an update. You'll get an update when there's an update to give." Grout stepped closer. "Right now, I need you to return to your seat." "I've been in my seat for 3 hours. Sir, I'm not going to ask you again." The thing about that sentence, "I'm not going to ask you again," is that it signals an endpoint that the speaker has already decided upon, regardless of what happens next. Elijah had heard that sentence, in various forms, from various people in various high-stress environments, and he knew exactly what it meant. It meant the conversation was not actually a conversation. It meant the next move was already scripted, and the script only had one direction. "I'm a family member of a patient," Elijah said very clearly, keeping his voice just loud enough that the 6 other people in the waiting room could hear him without him having to shout. He had learned that too. Always say the important things at a volume that creates witnesses. "I have a legal right to patient status updates under HIPAA. I am not raising my voice. I am not threatening anyone. I am asking one more time to speak to a charge nurse." Grout's jaw tightened. The hand on the radio dropped to his hip instead, to the non-lethal restraint device holstered there. An oversized zip-tie takedown tool that hospital security supervisors were authorized to carry after a training course that lasted 4 hours. 4 hours. Elijah watched the hand move and recorded it the way he recorded everything now. Tactically. Automatically. Without drama. "You're becoming disruptive," Grout said, and his voice had dropped to the lower register that men like him used when they wanted the threat to be intimate and deniable. "One more word out of you, and I will have you removed from this facility. You can wait for updates in the parking lot." A few of the people in the plastic chairs shifted. One older woman in a yellow coat looked up from her phone. "I'd like your name and your supervisor's name, please," Elijah said. That was the sentence. That was the one that lit the wire in Walter Grout's professional ego like a match to a short fuse. Nobody asked for his supervisor's name. Nobody wrote things down. Nobody looked at him the way this man was looking at him, not with fear, not with the crumpling compliance he had learned to expect, but with the quiet, absolutely unintimidated attention of someone who was simply documenting him. "That's it," Grout snapped. He grabbed Elijah's left arm above the elbow with both hands and yanked, spinning his body weight into a forced pivot designed to slam the smaller man off balance and into the wall. It was the same move he had used 17 times in 22 years. Calculated, practiced, designed to overwhelm before the target could process what was happening. He grabbed a pararescueman. What happened in the next 3.5 seconds was not a fight. A fight implies uncertainty of outcome. What happened was a structured response to incoming contact, executed by a man whose hands had been legally classified as capable of lethal force since he was 24 years old, who had completed over 2,000 hours of combatives training, and who had, on 3 separate occasions in 3 separate countries, used that training in conditions where the person on the receiving end of it was actually trying to kill him. By comparison, Walter Grout was an inconvenience. As Grout's hands closed on his arm, Elijah did not pull back. He rotated instead, into the grab, rather than away from it. A counter-rotation that broke the mechanical advantage of Grout's grip before it could fully lock. His right hand came up and under, finding the pressure point at the base of Grout's thumb with the precise, unhurried efficiency of someone performing a procedure they had performed so many times it lived entirely in the body rather than the mind. Grout's grip opened involuntarily. His weight was already committed forward. Elijah stepped to the outside, planted his rear foot, and used Grout's own forward mass to redirect him. A controlled throw, calibrated to take the man down hard enough to end the situation without breaking anything that would require its own ER visit. Grout hit the linoleum on his side with a concussive thud that echoed off the walls of the waiting room and knocked the air out of him completely. Before the echo had finished bouncing, Elijah was behind him, one knee between his shoulder blades, Grout's right arm drawn up behind his back at the precise angle that communicated "this ends now," without communicating "I am trying to injure you." The waiting room had gone absolutely silent. The woman in the yellow coat had her phone raised. 2 of the 3 ceiling cameras that Elijah had noted when he walked in 11 seconds ago were angled directly at this section of the floor. "Do not move," Elijah said. His voice was the same volume it had been the entire time. "I'm going to let go of your arm. When I do, you're going to stay on the floor until you've made a decision about how the rest of tonight goes. Do you understand me?" Grout wheezed. "Get off." That wasn't the question. Elijah applied a single millimeter more pressure to the arm lock. Not enough to damage, enough to clarify. "Do you understand me?" A wet, furious pause. "Yes." Elijah released the arm, stood up and stepped back 2 full paces, hands raised, palms visible. Before Grout had drawn his next breath, he had already done the legal math. He knew exactly how this moment would be processed by every camera in the room, and he wanted the footage to be unambiguous. Grout rolled onto his knees, gasping. His face was the color of old brick. The professional humiliation of what had just happened to him, in his ER, on his floor, in front of witnesses, had not yet fully metabolized into coherent thought. What replaced it instantly was the reflexive institutional narrative he had been reaching for his entire career. "I am the authority here. This man attacked me. I am the victim." "Security to the main waiting room," he wheezed into his radio, hauling himself upright with a hand on the registration desk. "Assault on security personnel. Detain the subject." "I did not assault you," Elijah said, still in the same even tone, still with his hands visible. He said it loudly enough for the room. "You initiated unprovoked physical contact with a lawful visitor to this facility." I defended myself. "Everything that just happened is on camera." 2 other security officers came through the side door at a run, stopping short when they found Grout disheveled and gasping, and a man standing quietly with his hands in the air. "Cuff him," Grout barked. "Assault, disarming a security officer. He's not armed," one of the younger officers said, confusion evident. He looked between Grout and Elijah with the expression of someone who has arrived at the second act of a movie without seeing the first. "I didn't touch his equipment," Elijah said. "I did not attempt to remove anything from his person. I am unarmed. I am complying with your presence right now. But I want to be very clear, for the benefit of anyone watching this footage later. I came to this desk to ask about my mother, who is a cardiac patient currently behind those doors. This man physically assaulted me without provocation. Everything I did after that was lawful self-defense." What happened next was the thing that Walter Grout had, in his most private and dishonest heart, been counting on for 2 decades: institutional protection. The wall. The assumption that the man with the badge, however small, gets the story. What he had not counted on was Dr. Yvonne Okafor. Dr. Okafor was the attending physician on overnight rotation in Hargrove's cardiac care unit. She was 51 years old, a graduate of Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, board certified in both cardiology and internal medicine. And she had specifically requested Vera Thorn's chart 20 minutes ago because something in the older woman's presentation had flagged her clinical attention. She had been walking through the double doors to find the family member on record when she heard the thud. She came through those doors now, and she took in the scene in the way physicians take in scenes, comprehensively, clinically, without the emotional loading that clouds civilian perception. Grout still breathing hard and flushed, 2 junior security officers looking uncertain, and Elijah standing with his hands raised, utterly composed. She looked at Elijah. "Are you Vera Thorn's son?" "Yes, ma'am." "I'm Dr. Okafor. I'm your mother's attending physician." She said it to him first, then turned to the room at large. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. "This man is the family member of my patient. He is authorized to receive information, and he is authorized to be on this floor. Can someone tell me what just happened here? Grout drew breath to answer, and Dr. Okafor held up one finger without looking at him. Not you, Walter. I'll hear from the camera footage. The silence that followed that sentence was its own kind of verdict. It took the hospital's security director, a compact and visibly unhappy woman named Director Strand, 40 minutes to pull the relevant footage to a monitor in the administrative office adjacent to the waiting room. During those 40 minutes, Elijah sat, not in a plastic chair, but in a private family consultation room that Dr. Okafor had escorted him to personally, with a cup of coffee that actually tasted like coffee and a preliminary update on his mother that he had needed for 3 hours. Vera Thorn was stable. Her troponins were elevated but trending correctly. They were monitoring her through the night. She was sleeping. He held that information in his chest for a long, quiet moment and let his nervous system do what it needed to do with it. Director Strand watched the footage twice. The first time she watched it like an administrator looking for liability exposure. The second time, she watched it like a human being. When she came into the consultation room, Walter Grout was behind her. His uniform straightened, his story already prepared, his confidence reconstituted by 22 years of walking out of rooms like this one, without consequences. He had his complaint language ready. He had his union rep's number memorized. He knew how this went. Mr. Thorn, Director Strand began. Elijah, he said. She nodded. Elijah, I owe you an apology on behalf of this institution. What I saw on that footage was a patient family member conducting himself with complete professionalism, being subjected to escalating harassment followed by an unprovoked physical assault by my security supervisor. She paused. I also saw the response to that assault, which was, she searched briefly for the word, remarkably controlled. Given the circumstances, Elijah said nothing. He had learned, over 11 years, that the moment after someone admits something important is not the moment to fill. Grout stepped forward. Director, if I could just explain the threat assessment I was working with. Walter, Director Strand did not turn around. You are suspended pending a full investigation, effective immediately. Deputy Navarro will escort you from the building. Please surrender your badge and your radio before you leave. Grout went the color of old paper. You can't. I've been here 22 years. I know. Director Strand turned to look at him then, and the expression on her face was not one that invited further conversation. Deputy Navarro is in the hallway. The sound of Walter Grout walking out of that room, the particular sound of a man who has finally, after a very long time, been held to account, was not dramatic. It was just footsteps. But in the particular quiet of 2:30 a.m. in a hospital corridor, it carried. Elijah flew back from his coffee. The investigation took 6 weeks. The footage was comprehensive and unambiguous. The zip-tie restraint tool that Grout had reached for, the movement clearly visible on the wide-angle camera, escalated the matter from assault to assault with a weapon in the DA's office's assessment. Grout's disciplinary file, 3 inches thick and largely ignored for 2 decades, became a centerpiece of the case. 11 prior complaints, 7 of which involved Black or Latino patients or family members. The pattern was not difficult to see. It had simply never been looked at directly before. Hargrove Regional, facing a civil rights lawsuit filed by the attorney Elijah retained the following week, settled preliminarily. The terms required, among other things, mandatory de-escalation retraining for all security personnel, an independent review of Grout's prior complaint history, and a formal written apology to Elijah Thorn and his family. Walter Grout was charged with assault and battery and civil rights violation under state law. His union, reviewing the footage, declined to provide representation. His trial lasted 2 days. Deliberation lasted less than 90 minutes. He was sentenced to 3 years. On the day the verdict came down, Elijah was not in the courtroom. He was sitting in his mother's kitchen in the same grey hoodie, watching her eat oatmeal and complain about its texture, and thinking about nothing in particular except the specific sound of her voice, being annoyed about breakfast, which was a sound he had driven 45 minutes through February sleet to protect and had protected, and which remained by a significant margin the best sound he had heard in the last 6 weeks. Vera Thorn pointed her spoon at him. You're staring again. I know. Stop it. Okay, he said, and didn't. She looked at him for a moment, the spoon still raised, and then her expression did the thing it sometimes did. Moved through some interior weather she didn't put into words, arrived somewhere on the other side of it. "They called this morning," she said. "Your lawyer. I know. 3 years. I know." She set the spoon down. She looked at her oatmeal. "He picked the wrong family," she said. Elijah didn't answer that, because it wasn't the answer that mattered. The answer that mattered was sitting here in this kitchen, and it was the fact that she was the one who said it, instead of him, and it was the specific, unhurried way she picked her spoon back up and continued, eating because she had things to do today, and a son to feed and a life that had not, despite everything Walter Grout had wagered against it, been interrupted. Some people mistake stillness for weakness. They see a man sitting quietly in a plastic chair, and they see a target. They do not see 11 years of nights in denied territory, or the particular quality of patience that grows in a person who has learned to wait for exactly the right moment and then move without hesitation. They see a hoodie. They see someone they've decided, before a single word has been exchanged, that they do not have to reckon with. Walter Grout had 3 years to reckon with what he'd missed. Elijah Thorn had oatmeal to eat with his mother, and a Thursday morning that stretched out ahead of both of them, like something ordinary and enormous and completely, permanently his.